It's time to answer more of your questions. It's a model railroad Q&A. Let's get to it. This video is brought to you with support from Trains.com. Trains.com is a fantastic source for new and used model trains and accessories. As a special offer to my subscribers, you can use the promo code JimmyDIY to get $10 off your order of $50 or more. You can check them out at the link in the description. Hey everybody, my name is Jimmy. Welcome to Coffee and Trains. Today I'm drinking some more of that store brand coffee, getting ready to switch to all my holiday blends here. But if you want to tell me what kind of coffee you are drinking and have it featured just like these guys right here, you can do that in the comments below, and who knows, you might see your name pop up on an episode of Coffee and Trains. And you might also want to get some questions in for the Q&A. This is the monthly Q&A. I've got one more Q&A this year, and you can do that by putting it in the comments below, and you might see your question answered on next month's Q&A at the end of the year. Cheers, guys. Now, before I get into answering, you may notice a couple modules stacked over there behind my shoulder. I'm getting ready to start working on the scenery for phase 2. I've got most of the wiring done and everything works well, so at least this section right here of the layout is probably going to get scenic over the next month or so. So be on the lookout for that. Okay, let's get into the questions. Terry's RR7230 says they're building a T-track layout and want to run a DCC accessory bus for the stationary decoders. They have the DCC EX 8874 motor shield with the 8266 Wi-Fi shield, which that's the things you put on top of it to build it. And they ask can they add a second motor shield with the Deke robot with the VIN cut. I am not sure about adding the regular Deke robot stack. I know you can stack the 8874s. What I would do is I would go to the DCCEX Discord server and ask them questions. I will link it. You'll have to create a Discord account if you don't have one, but they should be able to answer your questions. I've never tried that. I have stacked the DCCEX shields, but not the non-DCCEX shields. So that's the best place to answer that question. Jeep SLSF says he has a tough question and he's hit a wall with everything. He's tried to convert a couple locomotives to DCC and run on the club track, and they don't work. He tried to build custom locomotives and the project failed. He got a shell from Shapeways and was told to use a certain locomotive to fit it, and that didn't work. So he's basically trying all of these different things to try to get anything worked. And what I would do is I would say is don't give up, but maybe take a little bit of a step back and take a look at what your issues are potentially. So let's say the locomotives you're trying to convert, let's use that as an example. If those are, let's say, older Athearn blue boxes, those may have a couple of issues. They may have motors that are too powerful for the amount of amperage that can be pushed through a DCC decoder. They may need a couple of amps and you can only push like 1.5 amps. Or you may have a motor that is not electrically isolated from the chassis, so that may be another issue. So what I would really do is just make sure that you focus on those 4 main connector wires if you're doing a DCC conversion. And that's the black and the red that come from the track, and the gray and the orange that connect to the motor. So focus on those. I would play around with those and make sure you get it right. Now, one thing you can do to make sure that it is the locomotive or the locomotive you're trying to convert and not the way you're wiring it is literally connect them to just a simple DC motor. If you do that, you can get the wiring, because a lot of model railroad engines just use those regular DC motors. So you can connect those orange and gray hookups to a regular motor and then connect that to track power. And then you can see if that is able to make the motor work. And if it is, then you know that your issue is going to be within the locomotive itself that you're trying to build. So that can basically say like, okay, I'm not breaking the decoder, that's good. Basically, you're going to do a fault tree and you're going to work your way up and trying to figure out where the fault is and try to slowly work your way. Don't try to do everything at once and hope it works. Break it down and solve each problem and eliminate problems as you go. Albany and Northeastern asked me how I do my DCC wiring without doing a ton of spaghetti. So I do it a couple of ways. If I'm doing a more permanent layout, I'm doing terminal strips where I will do the little connectors and make one. I'll usually use 2 terminals and have have them right next to each other, and then I'll have one side be one side of the wiring and one side be the other, and everything feeds into there, and I have one wire that goes back out. For my T-track setup, I have just basically hubs. So like I have one wire that comes up from my base station down here below the table, and then it has a 3-split. And then one of those wires goes to another split, and then it goes to another split. And I've made those splits with mini Tamiya connectors because they are compatible with the Kato unijoiner or unitrack connectors, the terminal feeders. And so basically, wherever I do a split, so whenever I need to hook in a bunch, I have one more than that, and I do like a hook on for that. But if I'm doing, so to sum up, if I'm doing a layout that's not going to move, I'm just using terminal strips. If I'm doing this, I have little, like, it's kind of like a feed, and it's like going like out from the hub right there, and it just has like, it splits off in one direction. Politics and Trains ask if considering changing from DC to DCC and using the Blunami option for a few locos, is there a Blunami system to look at? There actually is not a Blunami system to look at, and that's actually one of the perks of it. You do not need a DCC system to run Blunami. All you have to do is have a constant supply of track power. Blunami runs through an app and connects directly through your phone, so it eliminates the need for a DCC system. Now, they are still decoders, and you can still use them on a DCC system, but you don't have to. So that's one of the big benefits of Blunami. Stockholm's Yarnvag 70 asks, what material do I use to model roads, and how would you do a downtown scene? Well, I use 0.04 inch styrene, and what I do for that is I basically cut it out in strips, and I can sometimes have the joiners. Wherever the joiners are, I make it look like it's like one of the asphalt splits and everything. And I do a mix of black and gray spray paint. I typically go black first and then kind of do the gray out, or I do reverse where I'll paint it gray and I'll do a little bit of spritz of black just to give it a little bit of that unevenness. And then basically what I would do is sometimes I will just lay it over in sheets rather than doing that, and arrange blocks with sidewalks pre-built and sit them on top of them. And that's how I would do a downtown scene. Philip Kett said, how do I turn around locomotives for switching? Do I have a Y, or have I tried the Kato turntable? I have not tried the Kato turntable, but the fact is that Kato is a Japanese company, and DC is a lot more popular than DCC is in Japan. So I'm pretty sure their turntable is made to work with DCC. They wouldn't have built it any other way. So you can definitely count on that working pretty well, even though I haven't tried it. And how do I turn locomotives around? I actually don't. So I run more modern diesels, and if I was going to do it, I would do a Y, because they just don't have turntables anymore, with the exception of very few locations. So if I were to build one, I would build a Y. But for most time, I'm either double heading with a locomotive pointing each direction, and it would just reverse, and then that locomotive would become the front locomotive. So that's what I would do. Michael Moss 3803 asks, for someone getting their first 3D printer, what do you recommend, resin or filament? So it depends on what you want to do. If you want to do large items such as accessories to hold stuff on your fascia, or large buildings or things like that, I would definitely look into a filament printer, because they're going to be able to give you more space. If you're looking to do detail parts and small parts, and even some medium-sized things, such as if you're in N-scale, you can do some buildings on it, I would definitely look at resin. Resin's going to be your high detail, and filament's going to be your larger size. You can still do some pretty cool stuff with filament, but resin's going to definitely be more detailed. So if you're looking to do detail parts, absolutely resin. And by the way, I would recommend the Eilgu Mars series. The Mars 5 is under $200 right now, and for filament printers, you can't go wrong with a Creality, Ender 3 series. You can also Eilgu Neptune, all those kind of stuff. They're all built around the same type of thing. I have a Bamboo Labs X1 Carbon, which is Brandon B 4971 says they have a question. What would be the best way to build a table for a model layout for an HO scale layout for 8x12? So what I would do is definitely look at the L girder benchwork method. Now, I've done that before. That's basically where you're building legs that look like this. These are L girders. That's what they're kind of like this. You have you'll have like a, let's say a 1x4 and a 1x3 together, and they make like a little perfect corner. And I've built these before. You just need some wood glue. If you have a nail gun, that's great, like a finish nailer. You can also just use a screwdriver. I've used that as well. So that's really what you need to do. And then you just build one by around it and make sure you wood glue everything, and then use some solid plywood for your top. CSX7026 says, what controller and decoder would you recommend for Kato in-scale locomotives that also needs to work with scale trains in-scale Jeep 30s that he has on order? So what I would say is that if I am putting in a non-sound decoder, I will always put in Digitracks. They're very affordable. They have, I think, pretty much every Kato decoder under the sun that you can get. For sound, it really depends. So if you're doing something like the E units or the F units or the P42s or something like that, you can either get a Soundtrax or an ESU. If you're doing sound for something like SD40s, SD50s, SD70s, some of those that have a bit of the narrower body where the decoder sits, you're definitely only going to have the option of ESU for sound. Derek Archer 1992 asked, any experience with the Kato soundbox? I do not have any experience with the Kato soundbox, but enough people have asked me about this that maybe I need to pick one up. So maybe I'll do that. Will Pats Cully asks, what would be the best way to deter cats from getting up on the layout? So what I did this is like a big question in model railroading. I think a running joke that cats love being on model railroad layout. So I started looking at funny cat videos and what they start doing. And I realized that there are two common things that cats are really scared of or can react to. Now, not every cat's going to react to it, but that is cucumbers. I guess they look like a snake if you put them behind them, or aluminum foil. There are several videos I've seen online where I'll try and find one and put it up right here, where the cats will try to jump up on something and aluminum foil will be on it, and as soon as they hit the aluminum foil, they do the spastic cat jump away. And the same thing, as soon as they see like a cucumber, it either keeps them away or it freaks them out and they run away. So it may be a little bit unorthodox, but aluminum foil and cucumbers, give it a shot and see if it works. Brent Barnett says that he was wondering if it'd be beneficial to go from using Bachmann EasyTrack to Kato Unitrack on his layout. Well, it depends on how much you have invested. If you don't have a ton invested, then I would definitely take a look at Kato Unitrack. But if you have a lot invested, you build a decent sized layout and everything's running fine and you're not having any issues other than a little bit of FOMO for not using Kato Unitrack, I think you'll be okay. Bachmann EasyTrack is not bad, especially in N-scale. It's nickel. The only track you can get is nickel silver, and it's some good stuff. So I would say weigh the pros and cons and see if Unitrack has some track pieces that solve issues that the N-scale EasyTrack doesn't, if you're trying to build something. But if you're not and you're just, maybe thinking you should change it up, I would definitely just look and see, do I actually need to? Mark DeBalzi Travel asks, what would be a good budget decoder for HO scale? He's wanting to slowly move his fleet to DCC EX and maybe one or two sound decoders. So your budget decoders are going to be Digitracks. Hands down, you'll be able to fit pretty much any decoder into them. Non-sound, sound, Digitracks is highly affordable. The only thing is that it only has, I think, 7 or 8 profiles loaded on the sound decoders. So if you want a custom decoder, you'll need that Digitracks PR4 to be able to connect it and then download the SoundLoader software so that you can load Digitrack's sound profiles. Now, if you want to go a little bit more premium, you're going to have to go to ESU, but you will need that ESU Loc programmer, which is about $150. Florida East Coast Railfan asks, would you ever go to Florida to Railfan? Absolutely, I would, especially to see the Brightline. I was actually in Florida a couple weeks ago, and I was at the Orlando International Airport, and you know that when I was on the shuttles going around Terminal C where the new rail station was, I definitely peeked in and saw one of the Brightline trains standing there. So absolutely, yes, I would, if nothing else, just to see the Brightline train. Cody Brudelli 4934 asks, what's a great scale of trains for the size of your first layout and also allows you to expand if you want to expand the layout even bigger? So that's a bit of a loaded question because that is probably the most complicated question in all of model railroading. It really depends on how much space you have. The scale that's going to have the absolute most for it, that's going to have everything for it, is going to be HO scale. Now, HO scale kind of blends the the tangibility of O scale with the size of N scale, so it's kind of right there in the middle, and that's why it's the most popular scale. So you're going to be able to get a good amount into a space, but you're not going to be able to cram a ton. You're not going to have big expansive scenery unless you have a big expansive space. If you want big expansive scenery and you don't have a huge space, definitely look at N scale. It's the second most popular, and you'll be able to find a lot of stuff for it as well. Randy Sarracker 416 asks that he has seen an Ontario Northland boxcar running on your layout. And he says he's from Timmins, Ontario, and he says it's kind of weird to see it on a non-Canadian layout. Well, that is true, and one thing though is that I actually do see a lot of Canadian rolling stock and locomotives down here where I live, which is right around Charlotte, North Carolina. I used to see a lot of CP before it was CPKC, and I also I still see a lot of CN Power on loan, and I also see a lot of Canadian Pacific, Canadian National, a lot of Canadian rolling stock, specifically covered hoppers and things like that. I see a ton of those every time I go by a yard. I'm not even talking about a big mainline yard. I'm talking about a switching yard or something that's right there at the end of a branch or something like that. I see Canadian rolling stock. So you see a lot of Canadian rolling stock out there. You know, the American and the Canadian rail networks are so intertwined that, you know, you can see stuff easily from all over North America. Regrets Gaming says, how do I make realistic mountains for my N-scale layout? So what I would say is that the easiest way to do this, there's two ways. There's the cardboard webbing, which I've done before, and then there's also just stacking extruded foam and then covering it with plaster of Paris. Now, it really depends on what kind of mountain you're doing. If you're doing something like East Coast of the US, where the mountains are completely tree covered, you can make puffball trees. I'll link a video to where I've done all my different tree types at the end of this video, and you can cover it in puffball trees and have a few hero trees sticking out of it, and that's going to look great. If you're doing something in the Rocky Mountains, you're definitely going to have to either go buy pre-made rocks to stick on it or look at rock molds to put it on there and do a little bit more detail on it. So it's really one of those things where you just got to try and start to do it. And I'll put a tutorial for rock making as well at the end of this video. David F9630 was given an Arduino controller and he knows how to use it on his phone, but he was instructed to get the DCC EX8874 motor shield. And he wants to know what he should do with this motor shield and how does it fit, and can he direct him to the right place to find information. So what I would do first of all is I would go to the DCCEX website. They're going to have some information on that can walk you through it. I would also check out the DCCEX Discord. I will link that in the description below, as I said before. And basically a motor shield is just a shield that goes on top of your Arduino. The pins will all stay the same. They have a little tiny label, and you'll be able to line them up and it'll slide right on there. There's no need for any special wiring or anything like that. And this thing is designed specifically for DCCEX and can do up to 5 amps, which is something that is really, really, really cool. So that's what I would do. You can check out the website as well as their Discord for more information. Plus, there will be people there that can help you out at the Discord server. Thomas L. Durbin asked, how would I make an industrial area where the rails go onto a concrete pad, simulating a loading or driving pad for truck deliveries? Well, I've actually done this, and I do this with styrene. I had an industry on my last layout that I recently tore down that was this, and all I did was I put the styrene right up next to the rails. Now I had Code 80 rails, which made it fairly easy. And then I cut out some styrene strips and put them in between the rails. And then I made sure that all the rolling stock rolls properly in there and doesn't get hung up or anything like that. So that is exactly how I do that. Paulwell Kuprowitz 2539 asks, he is a European railroad modeler and he's recently decided to get some American trains for his collection, and he is confused. He says in Europe they have very clearly defined eras of railway history and rolling stock models that are always assigned to a specific era by the manufacturer, but no such thing in the US. It's like how to tell which American cars belong to what time period. So this is the fun thing about, and this is because this is how the railroads in North America are. You can see cars that are really, really old running today. You can see 50, 60 year plus old cars running today because they get refurbished or they get sold and they get taken from being owned by a railroad to being owned by like a railroad leasing company. And you can see them all over the place. Regularly, you'll see cars running that are at least 20 to 30 years old. And then when you get into where you're modeling a little bit older, like mid-century, just after the transition era, you have a mix of cars that were from the transition era and then also the modern cars. So you have this really dramatic difference in car types. You can have these 40-foot USRA steel box cars next to these 50-footers, and you can also have like just like all sorts of different things. Like if you're talking about running intermodal, if you're talking about running all sorts of different auto racks, like it's really hard to nail down the era for cars. What you have to do really is look what the car manufacturer is. And what you do is you look there and you see when they manufactured it. And cars just kind of get mixed in as they go. Now, some cars you're not going to see anymore. Like you're more than likely not going to see a 40-foot USRA box car on a modern railroad anymore. But you are probably going to see some cars from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that still might potentially be in the space of the model railroad that you're building, depending on the time frame if you're doing modern. So if you're doing mid-century, you're definitely going to have a lot of different eras mixed together. So you can see some different stuff. And this is the same thing with locomotives, too. You can see locomotives running from a long time ago because locomotives regularly get refurbished and they get renumbered. You'll see that with a lot of EMDs. You'll see that with some GEs and things like that because they also get sold to smaller railroads. So you can see a whole mix of eras in American railroading, and that's why it's really hard to nail down what eras the model railroad rolling stock you're buying is because that's how it really is in the real world. If you have a question that you would like answered on next month's Coffee and Trains, the last one of the year, you can put that in the comments below and you might see your question answered. I do ask you to try to get all your questions in within the first week so that I can get this recorded a little bit earlier, especially since it's going to be the holidays and I'll probably be out of town during the time that it airs, so I want to get it done early. So thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, drink some coffee, and happy railroading.